Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Every year around this time, when my neighbors put up their inflatable Disney Halloween decorations, I know that spooky season has begun. Halloween, couple days away. Yeah. Oh, you want to come over and borrow some movies? My movies? My buddy knows I have an extensive physical media collection, and he calls up and he asks, well, can I borrow your discs? Like from my collection of films? So he says, dude, I want to borrow these movies from you. Like some of my really rare 4K discs that I've bought from all over the world that are special editions and sold out everywhere. You want to borrow some of those? And which movies does he want to borrow from me? Well, it's a collection of both old and new classics that he knows that I have on physical media. This beautiful UK version of Joe Dante's The Howling. This amazing Australian edition of Talk to Me. Not only do I have this, but I also have this. Uh-oh. He also wants to borrow Suspiria. Then there's 1981's Possession. I mean, my God, he's got good taste. Sam Neill and Isabelle Adjani. Ooh, this movie. And then The Incredible, Where Evil Lurks. If you haven't seen this, do yourself a favor. And then, of course, this banger from 1973, The Wicker Man. Now, do you think that I would possibly loan out this beautiful special edition to anybody? Yeah, I don't think that's gonna happen. The answer to that question is no. No one, and I mean no one, ever touches my physical media. Yeah, so the answer is going to be a big negatory, good buddy, on that one. However, there is a place that is terrifyingly scary. One of the scariest places you can go, and you can go there right now. You know, you're going to have to do some work. You're going to have to go there. You're going to have to do, I'll tell you where you have to go. Because this month, this scary realm is having a Fright Fest, and coincidentally, they've added all those movies I just showed to their lineup. You can get a very curated, a very bespoke collection of the finest horror films of all time. This actually isn't it. It's the taco stand next door, but it is scary. Where I am is one of the scariest places you could possibly go. And where exactly is this place? It's a place near and dear to us, a place we've been going to since childhood. That's right, the library. And did you know the library has its own streaming service? It's called Kanopy with a K. And underneath that canopy is all kinds of streaming entertainment. The best movies, documentaries, the best educational programs, and yes, the best horror. Kanopy is only available through participating libraries, so you need to be a member. Students and faculty at participating colleges and universities can also get a Kanopy membership. Fright Fest is happening right now, and the selection of films is ferocious. Get down to the local library and get yourself a library card. Yes. Or you could just go to Kanopy.com if you wanted to, but that's no fun. And check out one of the greatest curated collections of horror classics ever made. Right there, free of charge, ready to watch, right now.
I better be going.
I'll see you out. What will your testimony be at the inquest tomorrow?
The truth, I suppose.
Truth is relative. Even off the force, a fella can use a little help. Have you decided what line of work you'll be going into?
I only have the one trade.
What do you mean?
I'm a cop. A detective. I'm going private, that's all.
Who with? The Pinkertons? You got something lined up?
Just my own little agency.
I see. When were you planning on getting started?
Well, right away.
Oh, that's a shame. That really is.
How so?
Oh, the paperwork on these matters. A goddamn shame. Red tape. Sometimes an application for a license can be turned down for the most trivial of reasons. For no reason at all, actually.
So that's how it is.
I'll tell you how it is, Mr. Heller. Go out of the department under a cloud and you tie yourself up in a police scandal. Months go by, And you're not going to get your private detective's license till it's over. Till maybe, not never.
Suppose I agree to corroborate Lang and Miller's story.
I'm good at cutting red tape.
How good?
You'll have your license tomorrow, good.
And when the trial comes up, suppose I pull a double cross. Suppose I tell a different story, like the real one.
I don't think you do that. You're not a stupid man. Licenses get revoked for no good reason sometimes. The mayor giveth, and the mayor taketh the fuck away.
Shit. God damn it. I'll do it.
Thought you might. Sergeant Miller, get yourself a good night's sleep, Mr. Heller. Nate, you have a busy day tomorrow. Sergeant Miller here will see you home.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right. Me, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you from the Robservatory with shameless commercials. But hey, it's going into Halloween week. I started this, a little bit before 9 o'clock. I figured, why not? If I'm not going to promote my own work or promote myself, who's going to do it? No one. That's right. No one. I'm coming at you from the Robservatory. This is Robservations, episode number 993. And for those of you, I know this is the longest march to episode 1000 that I could possibly imagine. And I'm aware of that. And as you know, you heard little snippets. That snippet you heard of Michael Rosenbaum and Jeffrey Combs is what I like to call a pre-final mix. The first 2 episodes of True Noir, representing the first 70 minutes of the series, will have its final mix this week. And hopefully the plan is to start dropping episodes on the 8th of November. We're going to drop 2 episodes, and then every subsequent Friday, a new episode will drop. And anybody who supported us on Kickstarter will, of course, get those episodes early. You'll get them before anybody else. And I'm working my ass off. Basically, it comes down to I directed this, I produced it, Max Allen Collins wrote the whole thing, and now I'm editing it all. And it is an enormous task. It's 7 hours, many different characters, and I have my work cut out for me. So it's a lot of work, but as you can hear, the results are quite spectacular. So I want to thank everybody who supported our Kickstarter, and I hope when it drops, people will embrace it. And it is premium. It's not free. It's $2.99 an episode, but I think well worth it when you see the kind of talent we have and what was put into the making of it. We're going into a Halloween week. The world's getting crazy. Elections are coming. God, they can't be over soon enough. But there's a lot of good stuff happening in the world too. If you're a fan of The Cure, and they're kind of a Halloween band, they have a new album coming out. That's right. Songs of a Lost World. And The Guardian in the UK reviewed it yesterday. I won't read the whole review, but you can look it up, find it if you want. And this review was written by a woman named Kitty Empire. And this is not, her empire is not what I want to make great again. But anyway, you know what kind of empire we're going to make great again. We hope it gets great. It hasn't been great for a while. So check it out. The Cure, Songs of a Lost World. I mean, it gets 4 stars out of 5, and it's Kitty Empire's Artist of the Week. I don't know anything about Kitty Empire. I just can't believe there's a girl named Kitty Empire. I'm sure her parents didn't name her that. But The Cure have long dwelled in a kind of rarefied artistic blue zone in which the years pile up, but the end of the band is serenely defined. or defied, maybe due to a diet rich in red wine combined with a dogged aversion to modernity. Band leader Robert Smith does not own a smartphone. The band's consumption of polyphenols in the 1980s were legendary. Having crested The Cure's jubilant 40th anniversary in 2018, Smith swiftly announced a new album for release in 2019. Cure songs often tend to take a little while to warm up. The introduction to Alone, the opening track of Songs of the Lost World, clocks in at 6 minutes. 3 minutes elapse before Smith draws breath to sing. Likewise, a mere 5 years on from that announcement, including 2 years of generous, fan-pleasing gigs, the first new Cure album since 2008 has finally been deemed ready to drop. At a succinct 8 tracks and a downright sprightly 49-minute runtime, it's a thunderous statement on grief, anomie, and regret, and the passage of time. A specialist subject, what you might call the dear oblivion of lost things, according to the Victorian poet Ernest Dowson, whose dregs became the jumping-off point for Alone, is a major focus. All pretty much is lost. Youth, loved ones, the familiar. The album's cover does away with the squiggly artwork long favored by the band to be replaced by a lump of half-formed granite. Bagatelle, a 1975 work by Janez Piernat, I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of this right, redolent of a damaged classical sculpture rescued from beneath the waves. Its gray tones recall the cover of Faith, the band's dolorous epic from 1981. Throughout their history, The Cure have very often bucked the gothic thumbnail sketch of their output by rotating through crisp post-punk, the early years, romantic whimsy, the pop songs, and the wild psychedelic disarray, pornography. Existential melancholy is, though, their calling card bar none, and Songs of a Lost World delivers resonantly on the first part of Smith's promise of a triptych of new material. One album that's very, very doom and gloom, one that isn't, and a solo work of noise. This is a record that dolefully eats its own tail, an Ouroboros of bleak finality that begins with Alone. This is the end of every song we sing. We toast with bitter dregs to our emptiness and concludes with the stately, remorseless end song. It's all gone, it's all gone, it's all gone, left alone with nothing. At the end of every song, the latter's lead guitar part feels like an acidic pin to the foolishness of strutting and fretting even a minute upon the stage, much like Hendrix upended the Star-Spangled Banner into a rebuttal of the Vietnam War. This is a very colorful, verbose review. Both of these bookends benefit from the emphatic pummel of Jason Cooper's drum kit, driving home the message of inexorability. These tracks were written in response to... You can't read this aloud. It's like reading the script for Star Wars. These tracks were written in response to a spate of losses among Smith's family and friends pre-pandemic, but encompass the sucker punch of the 2020-2021 too. Birds Fall from the Sky, nodding to the climate crisis. The most direct track is I Can Never Say Goodbye, marking the passing of Richard, the music-savvy elder brother looked up to by a young Smith. And Nothing Is Forever, leaden with piano and strings, deals with his deep regret at having made a promise to be with someone on their deathbed, one he could not keep. Another theme eats caustically away at many of these songs, the question of Smith's own selfhood. It seems to be fracturing even as every music fan has a pretty solid idea of who this monumental figure is. The stage is set for Songs of a Lost World to be lugubrious and overwrought from end to end. Wisely, Smith opts to spike his pain with bitterness and paranoia too. War Song musters the sour hum of organ to deal with an intractable conflict. Two people locked in enmity forever. Well, there you go. I can't read any more of this, not because I can't read, which we're going to get to in a minute, but because it's a very difficult read for a rock album. Anyway, she does later call it the best Cure album since Disintegration, and if you're a Cure fan, maybe I should have just said that and not read this review at all. But it's Robservations, and I haven't done one in a while, so who knows what's going to happen tonight. So before we get to Mr. Alan Moore, and before anybody accuses me of shilling, when I show stuff on the show, this is not a paid advertisement. This is Alan Moore's new novel, The Great When. To be honest, I have not read this yet. I just got it. So I have not read it yet. I'm going to put it up next to his other novels over on that shelf over there. It is what is called a long London novel, a fantasy that's set, I think, in the 20s, believe it or not. I don't know. Long London. Obviously, it deals with the occult underbelly of London because, after all, we all know that Alan Moore is a warlock, and he has been. So he uses magics that are way beyond my pay grade, so I can't talk about those. But I can talk about something that I've wanted to be talking about for a long time on this show. I've wanted to do this Robservations for 2 weeks, so this is going to be probably a double-sized Robservations because I have two very important articles to read. The first is about reading, is about books themselves. Now, I've spoken a lot on this show over the years about how my own fandom, when I was a kid and I was watching Star Trek and I started watching movies, seriously, I know I was only 5 years old, but I was as serious about them as I could possibly be at that age, because it was very apparent to me that these things that I was watching, whether it was Star Trek, whether it was Planet of the Apes, whether it was The Twilight Zone, whether it was Outer Limits, these things that for whatever reason, I might not have understood everything that I was reading, but I knew that they were important and they mattered. And there was a lot more going on than I might have understood at the time, but I knew it was something that I could reach for, that I could grasp, that I could, hopefully, it would pull me up somewhere that I didn't know where that would be, but I knew I wanted to go there. And all of the things that I liked, whether it was, and I'll tell you something, I started to make connections when I was a kid, when I was watching Twilight Zone, and I realized one of the people, Rod Serling, who created the Twilight Zone, also worked on Planet of the Apes. So I was making these connections, and I saw other credits like Richard Matheson, who wrote Star Trek episodes, also wrote Twilight Zone episodes. And then, in the little bit of research that I could do at the time, 5, 6, 7, we had Star Trek books in the library that I would get in our elementary school library. There were Star Trek books, the James Blish books. That's where I found Spock Must Die, the original Star Trek novel that James Blish wrote. But one of the things that I was taught, actually self-taught, I guess, revelations that I made that nobody gave them to me. These are sort of my private life. I was discovering that all this stuff was interlinked. And a lot of the people that wrote this stuff, especially, you think about Sam Peoples, you think about Theodore Sturgeon, you think about Richard Matheson, you think about Robert Bloch, you think about a lot of George Clayton Johnson. These were people that were, I'd look and find out, oh, this person wrote a book. It took me till I was 10 years old before I read Richard Matheson's novel, I Am Legend, which I consider to be the first outright horror novel that I ever read. And then I found out, it had been adapted twice into feature films, The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price, and then, of course, The Omega Man that starred Charlton Heston, that also is in Planet of the Apes, that was also written by Rod Serling. So it was all interconnected. And as I got older and was more aware of this stuff, it led me to reading, because I found out that all these guys were novelists and short story writers. I mean, I knew that Richard Matheson had written short stories and books and things that had become movies, and it was all this continuum of awesomeness, of science fiction, horror, and dark fantasy or fantasy awesomeness. And all of these guys, I imagine there was some, Rotary Club of genre masters, of amazing storytellers, and they must have had a clubhouse because they all worked together and everybody was interrelated. Harlan Ellison, and as I started to really read, and I went to the library a lot and find these books, it really opened my eyes. And then I started to figure, okay, well, these people that were all involved in the things that I like, the same people, you think about Planet of the Apes, and when you find out that the guy who wrote the screenplay for Planet of the Apes, not Pierre Boulet, but the created the Twilight Zone, then it's suddenly like, oh, I have to know where are these octopuses where, not a garden, but where are the arms of the octopus? Where's it going to lead me? And it led me many places. And I developed quickly a love of reading, because it was quickly apparent to me that while I love these TV shows, the experience of reading the people who wrote these episodes that I love, if you read their books or their short stories, then, you find out that Robert Bloch, who wrote for Star Trek, wrote the novel Psycho. And it just went on and on and on and on, and it never ended. You'd find out that what classical piece of music was this? You'd look it up and you'd find out it was a Beethoven, piece, and you'd have to go, well, I've got to go hear that. Where's that Beethoven record? And in my case, my mom had all of Beethoven's. She had some vinyl that was downstairs in our family room where I always watched TV that I'd never touched. And then my mom told me one day that she thought she might have some Beethoven records in that stack of vinyl she had downstairs, which she had never touched in my entire life, the entire time we lived in our house for 21 years. From the time I was born to the time we moved out, I never once saw my mother touch her record collection ever. I was the only one who touched it. My mom could care less. But there were Beethoven records. That's how I could Beethoven's 7th Symphony is being used here. The Allegretto? It's being used in Zardoz. And all this stuff, I was looking for it. And it made me want to seek out. And there was no internet. I couldn't just do a cursory Google search and figure this shit out. I had to work, man. I had to work hard. Well, anyway, so there's an article in The Atlantic that shocked me. Now, as I said, other YouTubers have covered this, but I wanted to talk about this for 2 weeks, and maybe it's a little outdated, but the shock is not outdated. And I am quite. Let me share this with you, because it's stunning, and I think this article speaks to where we are at as a nation and as a people, and it ain't good. So this article is in The Atlantic, and it was written by Rose Horowitz, and her last name is Witch. How fitting for the times. The elite college students who can't read books. To read a book in college, it helps to have read a book in high school. Now, again, before I begin, I just want to point out that I went to Mercer Island High School, Mercer Island, Washington, a suburb of Seattle, in the middle of Lake Washington, between Bellevue and between Seattle. And it was, very upper middle class. Now I could never even afford to live there. It's more than upper middle class now. But when I was going to our school system, we had 5 elementary schools that fed into 2 junior highs that fed into a high school. And it's still a public school system, but it's very well funded. We were expected to read books. And there were books that I read in high school that I've never forgotten. I've talked about this before. Sinclair Lewis's novel Main Street is something that I think about even to this day. And yeah, it was assigned reading. In the 4th grade, Mrs. Walton, my 4th grade teacher, would read to us after recess, and it was my favorite part of the day. And John Christopher's Tripods trilogy. I know he wrote a 4th book, but I never read it. The White Mountains, The City of Gold and Lead, and The Pool of Fire. Because we got the books in drips and drabs after recess, I went and got all 3 of those books and tore through them. I was a voracious reader, and I did not delineate between movies, television, and books. I wanted to find great stories because they were different. They were different story delivery systems, and they had their various joys. But there's nothing better when you are reading, you're deeply immersed in a novel, and you have a relationship with the author who's telling you that story. It is a very different experience than seeing a movie, and a very different experience than watching a streaming show now or a television show back then. And I loved books because if you liked a certain kind of story, whether it was science fiction, horror, fantasy, you could go get far more of them. And there were hundreds, thousands. I don't know if I could say millions, but at least hundreds of thousands. And you could get them and experience them immediately. And I made friends with the old ladies that worked at Island Books, my local bookstore. Back then, there was no chain bookstores in our area. There were, you have to go downtown or to Bellevue. But I would order books. I would look in the back of paperbacks, my favorite writers, and I would see, there's an ad for other books they've written. And if they didn't have them at the bookstore, I would have the ladies order them for me, and they would show up. I get the phone call and rush down to the bookstore and buy them, come back home. But anyway, here's this article. Rose Horowitz, to read a book in college, it helps to have read a book in high school. Nicholas Dames had taught literature, humanities, Columbia University's required Great Books course since 1998. He loves the job, but it has changed. Over the past decade, students have become overwhelmed by the reading. College kids have never read everything they're assigned, of course, but this feels different. Dames' students now seem bewildered by the thought of finishing multiple books a semester. His colleagues have noticed the same problem. Many students no longer arrive at college, even at a highly selective elite colleges, prepared to read books. This development puzzled Dames until one day during the fall 2022 semester when a first-year student came to his office hours to share how challenging she had found the early assignments. Lit Hume often requires students to read a book, sometimes a very long and dense one, in just a week or two. But the student told Dames that at her public high school, she had never been required to read an entire book. She had been assigned excerpts, poetry, and news articles, but not a single book cover to cover. And to that I say, what the fucking fuck? My jaw dropped, Dames told me. The anecdote helped explain the change he was seeing in his students. It's not that they don't want to do the reading, it's that they don't know how. Middle and high schools have stopped asking them to. In 1979, Martha Maxwell, an influential literary scholar, wrote, "Every generation at some point discovers that students cannot read as well as they would like or as well as professors expect." Dames, who studies the history of the novel, acknowledged the longevity of the complaint. "Part of me is always tempted to be very skeptical about the idea that this is something new," he said. "And yet, I think there's a phenomenon that we're noticing that I'm also hesitant to ignore." 20 years ago, Dames' classes had no problem engaging in a sophisticated discussion of Pride and Prejudice one week and Crime and Punishment the next. Now his students tell him up front that the reading feels impossible. It's not just the frenetic pace, they struggle to attend to small details while keeping track of the overall plot. No comprehensive data exists on this trend, but the majority of the 33 professors I spoke with relayed similar experiences. Many had discussed the change at faculty meetings and in conversations with fellow instructors. Anthony Grafton, a Princeton historian, said his students arrive on campus with a narrower vocabulary and less understanding of language than they used to have. "There are always students who read insightfully and easily and write beautifully," he said, "but there are now more exceptions." Jack Chen, a Chinese literature professor at the University of Virginia, finds his students shutting down when confronted with ideas they don't understand. They're less able to persist through a challenging text than they used to be. Daniel Shore, the chair of Georgetown's English department, told me that his students have trouble staying focused on even a sonnet. Failing to complete a 14-line poem without succumbing to distraction suggests one familiar explanation for the decline in reading aptitude: smartphones. Teenagers are constantly tempted by their devices, which inhibits their preparation for the rigors of college coursework. Then they get to college and the distractions keep flowing. It's changed expectations about what's worthy of attention, Daniel Willingham, a psychologist at UVA, told me. Being bored has become unnatural. Reading books, even for pleasure, can't compete with TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. In 1976, about 40% of high school seniors said they had read at least 6 books for fun in the previous year, compared with the 11.5% who hadn't read any. By 2022, those percentages had flipped. But middle and high school kids appear to be encountering fewer and fewer books in the classroom as well. For more than 2 decades, new educational initiatives such as No Child Left Behind and Common Core emphasized informational texts and standardized texts. Teachers at many schools shifted from books to short informational passages, followed by questions about the author's main idea, mimicking the format of standardized reading comprehension tests. Antero Garcia, a Stanford education professor, is completing his term as vice president of the National Council of Teachers of English and previously taught at a public school in Los Angeles. He told me that the new guidelines were intended to help students make clear arguments and synthesize texts. But in doing so, we've sacrificed young people's ability to grapple with long-form texts in general. Mike Zakolka, a teacher and administrator who has spent almost 2 decades in Boston and New York schools, told me that excerpts have replaced books across grade levels. There's no testing skill that can be related to, can you sit down and read Tolstoy, he said. And if a skill is not easily measured, instructors and district leaders have little incentive to teach it. Carol Yago, a literacy expert who crisscrosses the country helping teachers design curricula, says that educators tell her that they've stopped reaching the novels teaching the novels they've long revered, such as My Antonia and Great Expectations. The pandemic, which scrambled syllabi and moved coursework online, accelerated the shift away from teaching complete works. This is mind-boggling to me. It is mind-boggling to me. It's mind-boggling because if you think about the civilization that we live in, most of it is built on ideas that came out of literature or letters, beginning, by the way, with the Bible. And I've always maintained to anybody, whether you're religious or not, first of all, the Bible's got some badass stories in it. It's actually a lot of fun to read. It's very entertaining. But so much of the tenets of Western civilization are in the Bible. Indeed, religious texts are where a lot of whether you read the Quran and the Bible and whatever text, the Bhagavad Gita, whatever you want to read. I mean, these are our foundational texts. These are the beginnings of our civilizations. And if you read things like the Constitution or go back to the Magna Carta, and it is letters and literature that make us understand the world that we live in. And I've noticed it. I mean, one of the interesting things is to watch how identitarians argue their points. They don't know a lot. And a lot of their points, you can go back and you can actually find the YouTube videos they've watched to give them their own talking points. The one thing that I loved when I was reading, like I told you, I was making connections between the people that were writing the TV shows and the movies that I loved with the books that they read or the books that they wrote, and I would go find them, was just how amazing their work was when you're getting it unfettered, uncut directly from their minds. You know, when you're watching a TV show or you're watching a movie, it's written by, say, Richard Matheson, and then you go read his book, I Am Legend. It's amazing. You know, and there's 3 different versions now of I Am Legend to compare the book to, and none of them have reached the pinnacle of what the book represents. And it's incredible to me. Reading is, in terms of your intelligence and broadening your horizons, is one of the most important things I think anybody can do. And like I've said, though, and like this article is pointing out, it's a skill like any other. In our desire to make people comfortable, to make people not have to, I mean, it's almost like we've wanted to take away any kind of discomfort children feel. And I understand we want our children to feel good. But the thing is, life is hard. And life requires application, and it requires attention, and it requires real skill. I've talked on this show about how watching movies is a skill. And one of the reasons I think that we don't have movie fans, I mean, it's not a criticism, it's a different world. And look, I didn't have the kind of open world video games that we have now, and I probably would have been a very different person if I could have played Ghost of Tsushima or Grand Theft Auto, or I mean, take your pick, when I was 12. I would be a very different person. But as the world, I mean, you know, nowadays when you're 12, you've got open world video games and all the porn you want. I don't think either one of those things are necessarily good for 12-year-olds. And again, you have to learn how to read, and you also have to learn how to have great sex. And if you're just watching a bunch of porn, you're not going to learn to do what you need to learn how to do. But anyway, you won't be good at it. So you'll back away and decide you're going to be non-binary because you don't want to deal with it. But anyway, so I'm kidding, sort of. But not reading,
the thing is, when you are reading, you are literally expanding your mind. You are literally expanding your mind and your subconscious. One of my favorite books, one of my favorite science fiction books I ever read was Neil Stephenson's seminal Snow Crash from the early 90s. And what was really interesting about that book is it had a concept that there was basically a language virus. Not like the horror movie Pontypool, but there was a language virus. And the book talked about how learning various things could rewire your brain. And I always thought that concept was really interesting. It just would give you a different way to think about things. And I had this actual experience happen to me in real life. And when I was growing up, I was editing. I started editing Super 8 movies when I was a kid. I had a little moviola, and you'd little cut and paste and tape them together. Tape one side to the other, and you'd start editing. And even when I was editing professionally, the first movie when I was working with Peter Billingsley, the first feature film I edited, which we rebuilt from scratch, even though we didn't get the credit for re-editing. We should have been the editors of the movie, but I get it. We came in after the fact, years after the fact. But when we were editing, editorial was a linear job. I mean, you had to kind of work your way. Now, you could work on different parts of a movie, but it was always a very linear thing. You'd add one shot. And when we were editing Arcade, we were editing on a tape system. We were editing tape to tape, 3/4-inch tape. And if we wanted to change something 10 minutes behind us, we then had to rebuild everything just to change one edit. And it wasn't until the mid-90s when I started to work on an Avid, when I was working at an ad agency called Jacobs & Gerber. It was a broadcast ad agency. They got the Avid in, and they asked me to figure out how to use it. And I was kind of the new man at Jacobs & Gerber. Craig Mazin worked there at the time. He was a copywriter. He actually wrote the ad line for Crimson Tide, Danger Runs Deep, which I thought was pretty cool. Now he's making The Last of Us season 2. And he did Chernobyl. Very smart guy. Went to Princeton. He probably read a lot of fucking books. I'm just telling you. So anyway, I didn't ask him that at the time, but I probably would have, this was 30 years ago. But anyway, so when I started editing and on the Avid, it was literally rewiring my brain. Because when you can edit non-linearly, you're no longer locked into one shot coming after another. You can jump around. You could take a whole 90-minute movie and go anywhere you wanted to instantaneously. If you did something at minute 75, which means you wanted to go change something in minute 16, you could immediately go back and do it. My entire system, the entire way I thought of film editing was immediately altered. My brain, literally pathways in my brain, I thought I was supposed to do something one way, and nonlinear editing completely changed that. Completely changed the way I thought about editing, and literally my brain was getting rewired because of new information. Every book can do that to you. Every book can change the way you think about things, can change the way you view things. There is nothing, I think, more profound than the way your thought process, certainly movies and music and all that has the power to change the way you think. But if you read a book, and I've got no scientific methodology or any kind of report I can to back this up. This is just something I'm going to say is a theory. But when you're engaged in reading a text and you're really enjoying reading the text, you're taking it inside of you mentally and maybe emotionally in a way that you can't otherwise. You're having a relationship with words on a page, so your brain is engaged in a different way than if you're looking at images. And if you read a book that's awesome, that you just totally find delicious. I've talked about how last summer I had the experience reading Project Hail Mary, that the movie just wrapped, that Ryan Gosling is starring in, written by Andy Weir, who wrote the novel The Martian was based on. And when I started reading this book, it was so entertaining. I was so locked in. I didn't even get up from where I was sitting in the kitchen, even though Elizabeth tried to get me to move, until I was done with the book. I got the box from Amazon, cracked it open, got the book, opened it up, started reading, and I was hooked, man. I was hooked from the first couple of words. And I was locked in. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to be interrupted by moving to a couch that was probably 10 paces away from where I was sitting at one of these high top chairs at the island in our kitchen. I didn't want to get up. I was that immersed. But again, it is a skill. But it's a skill that we are not teaching children because we don't want things to be hard for them. And when did this, I don't know when this mentality happened. Like in our desire to make sure the kids are comfortable, the world is uncomfortable. Nobody was ever comfortable in school. You were always stressed out about stuff. And now we've taken away anything. Well, the results are kids can't read, which means if kids aren't reading, their mental capacity is being stunted. I mean, clearly, you never know how much stuff about the real world you just pick up in someone's description of something. Like if you want to know anything about military hardware or guns or submarines or jet fighters, read a Tom Clancy Jack Ryan novel. Do yourself a favor and read Hunt for Red October. Or if you've seen all the Jack Ryan movies, go pick up Red Storm Rising. That's a movie about World War III between the Soviet Union and the Americans, and everybody else. And let me tell you, that book is gear porn at its finest. It's also wildly entertaining to read. And if you've seen all the Jack Ryan movies, why don't you read a Jack Ryan book that you haven't? Read Executive Orders, where Jack Ryan becomes the President of the United States. Perfect for election week. Go pick it up. I highly recommend it. Yeah, it might be a gigantic book that's 1,000 pages long or something, but I promise you it will be fun to read. In a recent Ed Week Research Center survey of about 300 3rd to 8th grade educators, only 17% said they primarily teach whole texts. This is mind-blowing. An additional 49% combine whole texts with anthologies and excerpts. I used to give my dad shit because he was reading Reader's Digest condensed books. He'd get them, they were hardcovers, but it was 3 books condensed into one book. So you buy one book, but you get 3 condensed books. And I'm like, Dad, how do you know what you're missing? You don't. Why do you want to read condensed books? And he's like, well, if I get the story, I don't need to read all the nuances. And it would drive me crazy. He had shelves of this shit. And I'd walk in and I would disdainfully look at him. I was like, 10 years old. I'm like, how can you read this swill Reader's Digest condensed books? I mean, admittedly, they had good books. But why would you want to read some of the great books of all time in a condensed version? I mean, reading should be a joyful experience. Plus, there's hardcore violence and awesome sex in a lot of great horror novels, so why wouldn't you want to read them? Bow, chicka, bow, bow, and then someone gets their throat slit, or a monster eats you, or some disease takes your life. It's great. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Or read great science fiction? I don't know. 17% said they primarily teach whole texts. An additional 49% combined whole text with anthologies and excerpts, but nearly a quarter of respondents said that books are no longer the center of their curricula. One public high school teacher in Illinois told me that she used to structure her classes around books, but now focuses on skills such as how to make good decisions. In a unit about leadership, students read parts of Homer's Odyssey and supplement it with music, articles, and TED Talks. What, Homer wasn't enough for you? For a long time, centuries in fact, no one needed to supplement Homer with music, articles, and especially TED Talks because they didn't exist. The Odyssey and the Iliad were seminal. I read those in school, and they were fucking dope. And not only that, a lot of these seminal texts provide a framework to understand the civilization you live in. I'm always surprised, like when you read Shakespeare's Hamlet, for instance, how much of Hamlet has trickled down into every facet of our pop culture. I mean, if you've never read Shakespeare, and I'm not talking about reading Shakespeare in the original Klingon either. I'm talking about reading Shakespeare. Like, no, don't read the Cliff's Notes. People even know what those are. Do they even have Cliff's Notes anymore? I don't know. Don't read that. But if you read Shakespeare, and admittedly, it's a chore because it's older English than we're used to, but very gratifying. When you start reading Shakespeare's plays, it's shocking how much his plays and stories have permeated into Western civilization. Now, don't throw at me, well, Rob, Shakespeare's just an old white guy. What does he have to say about... No, you don't understand. Great stories have something to say about everybody. You know what? If you want to go read Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, I should suggest you do so. And it's not about somebody who turns invisible. It's about somebody who's invisible for purely and very different reasons. But Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man is another book about race in America that was unforgettable. And I think I read that in junior high school. Maybe. Another book that you can't forget. When I was in college, I read a book called The Hidden Dimension by a guy named Edward T. Hall. And the book was all about spaces, human spaces. I finished a book a couple weeks ago by Greg Egan called Quarantine that started out as a simple detective story, and I've told people this, it's 251 pages, the paperback. By the time that book was over, my mind was fucking blown. I was like, oh my God. 250 pages, I probably read it in 4 sittings. It was amazing. You know, mid-90s science fiction. You just never know. You never know. Why people don't read? I mean, it's amazing to me. By not reading, you are depriving yourself of basic life skills that will help you in every facet of your life. Plus, you can't even imagine how much information that you absorb about our civilization by just reading, you know, through descriptions. You know, a lot of people make up the fact, or they'll bitch and moan and complain about Stephen King writing, he's the McDonald's of fiction, which is totally not true, because he's so keyed into human emotion and human interaction that to read a Stephen, as I've said, all the best fiction is the most truthful. And when it comes to great fiction, the best fiction will tell you more about human nature than watching 10,000 TikTok videos will. I promise you that. An advanced placement English literature teacher in Atlanta told me that the class used to read 14 books each year. Now they're down to 6 or 7. Advanced placement AP English literature. 6 or 7? Down from 14? Half? Who are you doing a disservice to? I don't understand. I mean, I'm sitting literally in a room full of thousands of books and thousands of comic pages too. So private schools, which produce a disproportionate share of the elite college students, seem to have been slower to shift away from reading complete volumes, leading to what Dames describes as a disconcerting reading skills gap among incoming freshmen. But private school are not immune to the trend. At the prep school that I graduated from 5 years ago, I took a Jane Austen course my senior year. I read only a single Jane Austen novel. That's insane. The issue that Dames and other professors have observed is distinct from the problem at community college and non-selective universities, where some students arrive with literacy and comprehension deficits that can leave them unable to complete collegiate courses. High-achieving students at exclusive schools like Columbia can decode words and sentences, but they struggle to muster the attention or ambition required to immerse themselves in a substantial text. Again, this is a skill. This is a basic skill that I was taught at a very young age. Not only that, I was teaching myself because I would go get books. I would have a dictionary or a thesaurus sitting next to me when I was reading books, because I would frequently come across words I didn't know. And boy, it only took a few seconds to look up those words and figure it out, or you learned how to infer meaning because of what words became before and after. Faced with this predicament, many college professors feel they have no choice but to assign less reading and lower their expectations. This is horrifying. Horrifying. Victoria Kahn, who has taught literature at UC Berkeley since 1997, used to assign 200 pages each week. Now she assigns less than half of that. I don't do the whole Iliad. I assign books of the Iliad. I hope that some of them will read the whole thing, Kahn told me. It's not like I can say, okay, over the next 3 weeks, I expect you to read the Iliad, because they're not going to do it. Why are you in college? Why are you spending money to go to get an education that you're not getting? I don't get it. Andrew Delbanco, a longtime American Studies professor at Columbia, now teaches a seminar on the short works of American prose instead of a survey course on literature. The Melville segment used to include Moby Dick. Now his students make do with Billy Budd, Benito Cereno, and Bartleby the Scrivener. There are some benefits. Short works allow more time to focus on the intricacies and subtleties of language, Delbanco told me, and he has made peace with the change. One has to adjust to the times, he said. The Columbia instructors who determined the Lit Hume curriculum decided to trim the reading list for the current school year. It had been growing in recent years, even when students struggled with the reading, as new books by non-white authors were added. Like Del Banco, some see advantages to teaching fewer books. Even the best prepared students have probably been skimming some of their lit hume assignments for years. Joseph Howley, the program's chair, said he'd rather students miss out on some of the classics. Crime and Punishment is now off the list, but read the remaining texts in greater depth. And crucially, the change will give professors more time to teach students how they expect them to read. Okay, I'm not going to read any more of this depressing article because you can go find it. It's down in the description below. But this is absurd. We are watching in our culture. Let's not teach civics anymore. Let's not teach people how to read. People are learning how to argue. They're learning all about difficult political situations from TikTok videos that are also made by people who haven't read. You know, if you want to find out what's going on in a certain situation in the world, read books. Don't read some article and expect that you know everything. I mean, the byproducts of reading, it's kind of like the byproducts of the space program. You know, the idea that we're going to go to the moon is awesome, but the research required to get to the moon has just an infinite number of uses that will trickle down into the rest of civilization. We don't even know yet where space research moving forward is going to take us. There are so many different items in our own culture that we have that we use on a daily basis because of space research, or any kind of research for that matter. I mean, if somebody said, we'll just do half the research, or we'll just stop doing it, where are we going to wind up? To the point where we're going to have a population that can barely speak to one another? I guess that's where some people would say that the global elites want us to go. But it's not about what other people want. It should be about what you want. You know, reading is something that used to be, when I was a kid, reading was fundamental. You know, you had Schoolhouse Rock and you had reading is fundamental. Those are things. I'm just a Bill. Yes, I'm only a Bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Conjunction, junction, what's your function? In school, I'd think and, but, or. Those are conjunctions. I still think about that just the same day. I made a tweet the other day, and I was thinking what's happening is I'm sitting here about to watch Gladiator 2. I actually tweeted, verb. It's not what's happening. I was thinking about Schoolhouse Rock. People are like, what are you talking about? Verb, that's what's happening. But nobody even remembers that. Do people even know what verbs are? I mean, it's unbelievable. It's not that it's not about not learning. It's about the laziness that people don't want to do the work. And it's a function of the dopamine hits we get from social media and the fact that parents are no longer requiring. It's the school's fault. It's no longer their own kid's fault. If I came home with a shitty report card, it was my fault. My dad would be like, this sucks. You're in trouble. You can't do this. You can't do that. You better fucking buckle down, you know, because it's all about your future. And nowadays, no wonder so many kids today want to become Marxists, because they think they won't have to do the work. Yes, let's have the workers take control of the means of production. Oh, really? Well, who's going to build those means of production in the first place? Well, you know, people who read, that's who. And if you're not reading, you're not even going to be a good communist. I guess they don't need you to read. They just need you to follow right there in line. Spout the party philosophy. You don't need to know what it means. And clearly, that's happening more and more. If you watch online discourse, clearly, very few people have read, and you can figure out what YouTube videos have bestowed their opinions on people that they're just parroting badly. Anyway, I can't tell you what a joy it was to grow up a reader. You know, I joined the science fiction book club. I was always running to the bookstore, and I thought of books. And look, I mean, I've got horrible I get obsessed with authors. You know, now Max Allan Collins, who I'm working with, I'm delving into his work. But, you know, I told this story before. Andrew Vaux's Burke novels. I think he wrote 20 of them. I didn't want to read the last one, Another Life. I love the Burke novels. I read them all. They're right over there. And I didn't read the last book because I didn't want that character to be gone to me. I told Andrew Vaux that once on social media. He's like, I understand. I'm like, I don't want to read your final book. I have all your other books in first edition hardcovers. I have them all, including Another Life. But I don't want to read it. And it's been like 10 years at least since he wrote that book. And I haven't read it. I don't want that character to be gone. That's how much those books meant to me. And to hear that people aren't reading, our civilization, The very foundations of our civilization were written by people of letters, people that could write and comprehend complex ideas that were only brought forth in literature. Now, I would say complex ideas can really be brought forth in movies, but nobody even has the attention span to watch a fucking movie anymore. So I guess you're just going to watch excerpts, which that's what YouTube's best at, right? You know, you don't have to watch an entire episode of House. You just have to watch an excerpt. I mean, that's where it's coming to. Again, movie watching, just as much as reading, is a skill. And it's a skill that people aren't learning. And it's terrifying. And it makes me, I'm telling you, reading books, even if you read the most depressing novels in the world, you know, they will make you happier. I promise you. The fact that we're looking at this future that's going to be built by people who haven't read books. I mean, for so long, humanity didn't have books to read. And then when they did have books to read, most of the population couldn't read. Reading is power. Reading allows you to learn about how to exert that power over your fellow man. And if nothing else, there's a good enough reason to read. Anyway, I wanted to start with that, but man, is it depressing. So anyway, now, all of these topics, by the way, are interrelated. The Cure album, the reading, and now, that's right, Alan Moore. Now, for those of you, I first became aware of Alan Moore when I started to read comic books in the 80s. Now, Alan Moore started as a British comic writer. He wrote a lot of stuff for 2000 AD. He wrote like V for Vendetta when he worked in the British comic industry. And then he came to America and really started to gain notoriety writing Swamp Thing, taking over Swamp Thing. I mean, the anatomy lesson blew me away. And of course, Watchmen was my favorite at the time. I mean, when in 86, it was my favorite superhero comic ever. You know, now it seems silly because the movies have come out and all that, and now you can watch the new animated adaptation. But I have to tell you, you know, Alan Moore, I did love V for Vendetta, but the end of Watchmen issue 11, it was a 12-issue miniseries, when Ozymandias is revealed to be the villain and explains to Dan and Walter Kovacs to Rorschach what's actually going on. I mean, it was a comic book, but it's because it was also really well written and well drawn. But the end of Watchmen 11, I was gobsmacked by the end of a comic book. Absolutely gobsmacked. I'm not some Republic serial villain, Dan. You know, if you had the slightest possibility of paraphrasing of changing its outcome, I wouldn't tell you. And then he says, I already put my plan into action like 35 minutes ago or something. And they both realize that, oh my God. And then you turn the last page and it just shows the two of their faces looking at him, like they're looking at him like this. And then it all goes to white. I was stunned. It was a comic book and I was stunned reading this. I didn't see it coming. And I know people are like, well, Rob, it's just another riff on the Architects of Fear, which, by the way, because I was 5 and started watching Outer Limits, I know exactly where that reference came from, and I knew that when I read it. Why? Because the more well-read you are, the more things you've seen, the more these things just are right there in front of you, the more you will enjoy the world. That's why it's important to gain lots of knowledge, because you will like the world more, and you will hate people less. You'll find them, you won't be judgmental. You'll be curious, as Ted Lasso might tell you to be. But anyway, here it is. Here's what Alan Moore wrote a column for The Guardian, which I read the other day. Actually, yesterday. He wrote this yesterday. Fandom has toxified the world. Watchmen author Alan Moore on superheroes, Comicsgate, and Trump. Enthusiasm can be a productive force for good, but our culture has rapidly become a fan-based landscape that the rest of us are merely living in. Now, before everybody gets all cynical and writes this off, like, who cares what Alan Moore thinks? Well, he has a new book coming out, and in terms of the comic book industry, He revolutionized comic books. He did. I should say this. He revolutionized how superhero comic books can be viewed in the eyes of the public. Because in America, the comic book industry and our no one really took comic books very seriously. In European and in Asian countries, graphic arts had far more respect than the comics that we were cranking out in America. And it wasn't until the British invasion of comic book writers that included people like Grant Morrison and Warren Ellis and, of course, Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman and all of these guys that came over and revolutionized comic book storytelling in many different genres. I mean, my favorite comic book series of all time, despite recent events, is still Neil Gaiman's Sandman. Because it's a comic book series that's literally about storytelling and the power of storytelling. But Alan Moore, reading V for Vendetta, reading for What Do You Get for the Man Who Has Everything, all of these great stories that Alan Moore wrote, and Watchmen being the pinnacle of that. Anyway, here's what he says. Here's Alan Moore. Take it away, Alan. About a decade ago, I ventured my opinion that the adult multitudes queuing for superhero movies were potentially an indicator of emotional arrest, which could have worrying political and social implications. Since at that time Brexit, Donald Trump, and fascist populism hadn't happened yet, my evidently crazy diatribe was largely met with outrage from the fan community, some of whom angrily demanded I be extradited to the U.S. and made to stand trial for my crimes against superhumanity, which I felt didn't necessarily disprove my allegations. 10 years on, let me make my position clear. I believe that fandom is a wonderful and vital organ of contemporary culture, without which that culture ultimately stagnates, atrophies, and dies. At the same time, I'm sure that fandom is sometimes a grotesque blight that poisons the society surrounding it with its mean-spirited obsessions and ridiculous unearned sense of entitlement. Perhaps this statement still requires some breaking down. Concerning the word fan, I first encountered this contraction of fanatic during childhood in a television documentary on the phenomenon. All I remember is the wary spouse of a woman devoted to the late Jim Reeves, sitting in that's a reference that eludes me, sitting in a family home that had become a mausoleum of memorabilia and mournfully accepting that his wife had only married him because his name happened to be James Reeves. Soon after that, the word passed into common usage, although only in the milder sense of somebody quite liking something. And without the connotations of a person listening to distant drums on endless replay with the curtains down, or a cultist running wild-eyed from the tree line waving a machete. Fan, then, meant merely enthusiast, but sounded less Edwardian. Quite liking comics, age 14, I thus became a comics fan, with my discovery of British fandom, which was then still gummy-eyed and fresh out of the egg. The first convention I attended, in London, in the basement rooms of a Southampton row house in 1969, was tiny and inspiring. The attenders barely totaled a 3-digit number, almost all of them some few years short of legal drinking age. The comics companies, having no monetary interest in a handful of penniless teenagers, went blissfully unrepresented, and the only industry celebrity that I recall was the sublime and sweetly unassuming genius Frank Bellamy, passing Dan Dare or Garth originals around, appearing wonderstruck that anyone had even heard of him. The only thing uniting the assembly was its passion for an undervalued storytelling medium, and for the record, the consensus verdict of the gathered 15-year-old cognoscenti was that costumed muscle men were the main obstacle preventing adult audiences from taking comics seriously. Of that hardly 100 school kids, office boys, and junior librarians, the great majority were actively involved in their pursuit, publishing or contributing to a variety of, for the most part, poorly duplicated fanzines, or else going on to work professionally in the field, such as Kevin O'Neill, Steve Moore, Steve Parkhouse, or Jim Bikey, all of whom were downstairs at the Waverly Hotel that weekend, keen to elevate the medium that they loved, rather than passively complain about whichever title or creator had particularly let them down that month. Of course, this was the 1960s, and the same amateur energy seemed to be everywhere, spawning an underground press, arts lab publications, and the messy, marvelous array of poetry or music fanzines that were the material fabric of that era's counterculture. Flimsy pamphlets as important and innovative today as they were then, although considerably more expensive, trust me. Now, here's where I would like to pipe in and point out that that's what we're doing here. I am not publishing a fanzine. I started a YouTube channel because that technology exists. And fans, for the most part, have always bitched and moaned and complained and have been very critical of what they wanted. It's just we never had platforms like YouTube that spread so far and wide. So what is being mistaken, I think, for... Does toxic fandom exist? Sure. I talked about it on my last Robservations show. But nowadays we get to see it, and fandom itself is amplified because of YouTube, and a lot of people don't understand. It's you know, growing up, you go to a science fiction fan, now everybody says normies. Before it was mundanes, before it was something else. You know, that fans know. Look, I learned from a very early age, and not because I'm superior or something, but I was literally the only fan like myself that I knew. I've met a few in my high school, my friend Shade Roop, or, you know, Greg Smith, or Clark Von Trotha. I had a few friends that understood Walter and William Olson, that understood fandom, and we were all fanatics in one way or another. But all of us were not just consumers. We would go out and we would go to events and we would interact with people, and it mattered to us. It wasn't the flights of fancy necessarily that mattered. Sure, the great superhero stories, and that was all the fun and games. That was the sweet exterior that we loved. And I think this is important for what people don't understand about fandom. Is fandom, true fandom, if you like something, you like it because it philosophically means something to you. It's not just something you like and pass your time watching it for entertainment. Certainly that's one thing. But to be a true fan, to be a true fanatic, is to be immersed in these things. And it's not just the thing that you're a fan of. It's what it says to you and what this thing and the lessons that are being imparted to you that you then turn around and put into your own life. So real fans are channeling this entertainment medium and channeling it through them, and hopefully are being altered by the experience, and for the most part, I would hope, become better people. I can tell you the fandoms that I was involved with since I was a young kid. Star Trek was a very healthy thing for me. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it took place in a century that was way in the future, and I knew it wasn't our world. Even as a 5-year-old, I'm like, this show is not about my planet. Maybe we can someday become like them, unlike the creators of Star Trek now that want to reconcile our history with Star Trek history, which is the most fucking moronic thing that I've ever heard in my life. Why would you try and reconcile our actual history with, let's retcon Star Trek to make it fit with our... Well, you can't do that. I mean, you can, and they did it, and it turns me off, but it's kind of dumb. They're more worried about superficiality than they are about the actual what they're saying, and that's frustrating. And I think now even the fans, because if you're not reading books or you're not delving into if you're not going much deeper into the things that you love and you're just allowing it to be washing over you on a very surface level, you're easier to be triggered. You know, as somebody who grew up reading comics, I read all different kinds of Batmans. You could have the Batman and the Outsiders Batman. You know, you could have the Arkham Asylum Batman. You could have the Batman Year One or the Dark Knight Returns Batman. You could have the Neil Adams Batman of the 70s. So I knew that there were many different iterations of Batman, but the core concepts that the character had were still the same across all those different versions. One might be lighthearted like Batman and the Outsiders. One might be nightmarish like Arkham Asylum. The Killing Joke was hardcore. But it's what Gotham by Gaslight, Victorian era Batman. And it's so weird to me when there's a few people that come after me online, and they whether it's Snyder Bros or people who are constantly coming after me because I liked Matt Reeves' The Batman. And I'm like, look, I grew up reading multiple iterations of Batman, sometimes many in the same month. So to me, Batman is a character as long as the core tenets of the character exist. it's always interesting to see the take on that character. It's funny. I don't think anybody would want to have a return, because clearly Joel Schumacher, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin showed that not a lot of people want to go back that direction. But the first Batman I watched in terms of media was the 60s Batman with Burt Ward and Adam West, of course. And would you want that Batman today? Nobody would want that Batman today. But when I was watching Batman when I was a kid, I loved that Batman. Loved that Batman. Why wouldn't I? You know, and then I could watch Super Friends Batman. I'm not watching Identity Crisis Batman, like, you know, Dan Coyle's favorite comic. I'm not watching that Batman. And now to not enjoy that the Batman we're getting on the big screen, there's different iterations, whether you like one more than another or you don't like one at all. We've still been getting various iterations of the Batman. And isn't that cool? Now you want them to be good. You want people to like them, but it becomes very, I don't know what's happening with YouTube. Why am I being punished? Why? Because I'm a Zionist? Is that why? Anyway, of that hardly 100. Oh, let me go back to this article. Of that hardly 100 school kids, office boys, and junior librarians, a great majority were actively involved in their pursuit. So what they were doing, fans, what Alan Moore was saying is, those fans were publishing things, publishing books and fanzines and all that. We, of course, go to YouTube. Soon thereafter, caught up in the rush of adolescent life, I drifted out of touch with comic books and their attendant fandom, only returning 8 years later when I was commencing work as a professional in the fondly remembered field to find it greatly altered. Bigger, more commercial, and although there were still interesting fanzines and some fine committed people, I detected the beginnings of a tendency to fetishize a work's creator rather than simply appreciate the work itself, as if artists and writers were themselves part of the costumed entertainment. Never having sought a pop celebrity relationship with readers, I withdrew by stages from the social side of comics, acquiring my standing as a furious, unfathomable hermit in the process. And when I look back, even after an internet and some few decades, fandom was a very different animal. An older animal, for one thing, with a median age in its late 40s, fed presumably by nostalgia that his energetic predecessor was too young to suffer from. And while the vulgar comic story was originally pro-offered solely to the working classes, soaring retail prices had precluded any audience save the more affluent, had gentrified a previously bustling and lively cultural slum neighborhood. This boost in fandom's age and status possibly explains its current sense of privilege, its tendency to carp and cavil rather than contribute or create. I speak only, well, you won't have that problem in the YouTube space. I speak only of comics fandom here, but have gained the impression that this reflexive belligerence, most usually from middle-aged white male conservatives, not true, Alan, is now part of many fan communities. My 14-year-old grandson tells me older Pokemon aficionados can display the same febrile disgruntlement. Is this a case of those unwilling to outgrow childhood enthusiasms, possibly because those anchor them to happier and less complex times, who now feel they should be the sole arbiters of their pursuit? Okay, I just want to point out, and I can't believe I'm going to disagree with old Alan Moore here because I love him so much. What has changed is that the things that we're fans of as kids have now followed us into adulthood. The fact that if you love fantasy and science fiction and you grew up reading comics, I did. My biggest comic book reading was in the 80s and 90s. And then I kind of fell out of it. But that means when the MCU rolls along in 2008, I suddenly become very interested. And after seeing Iron Man 1 and moving through the MCU as a huge Avengers fan and all that, it becomes something that as an adult, it has taken on a new iteration. So these things that you had as a kid, you'd grow up, they've grown up with us and they've become part of the culture now. Comic books, especially superhero comics, were never part of the larger cultural conversation. No one was talking about the MCU in 1985. You know, they would occasionally you'd read an article about how, Alex Ross Marvels broke through, or, something, Frank Miller, some direct sale thing. Maybe the general population would become aware of some comic book thing every blue moon. But now the entire world has grown up with this material, and it's part of the fabric of our culture. I don't look back at comic books with any kind of nostalgic gaze. I'm looking forward. When I saw Iron Man in 2008, that movie combined all of the modern technology of the day with an actor I'd been watching since I was a teenager, now playing a grown-up Tony Stark. Robert Downey Jr. was no longer in movies like Tough Turf or Less Than Zero. He's now playing Tony fucking Stark after he'd already played Chaplin. So you have an actor that grew up, that I grew up with, went through his own, I had my own travails, he had his travails, but he was somebody I always liked as a performer. And now he's going to play Iron Man in a state-of-the-art movie based on characters that I was reading about when I was a kid. So it's not as easy to say that we're looking back, that we fans are looking back from the nostalgia glasses. I don't look at Star Trek because I loved Star Trek when I was a kid and I still love it today. I love it because Star Trek grew up with me as a concept and as a show. It grew up with me as a little kid in the 70s, watching it when I was 5 years old. Then the animated series came along. Then Star Trek the Motion Picture came along. Then Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, as I was getting older and older and older. I had Star Trek there when I started junior high school. You know, turning 12, I was 12 years old when I went in. I was starting to watch Star Trek when I was 5. Watched all the shows, read all the novels, had the photo novels, had the Mego figures, had the blueprints. And then in 1979, a gigantic feature film, one of the most expensive ever made, shows up. And then they make... Now my favorite characters are into middle age in Star Trek 2, dealing with mortality, dealing with the Kobayashi Maru. I'm not looking back at this with nostalgia. I'm learning new things through the eyes of my characters that I love so much. And then in 1987, you get Star Trek The Next Generation, runs for 7 fucking years. Then Deep Space Nine runs for another 7 years. Then Voyager runs another 7 years. Then Enterprise runs 4 years. So Star Trek now, I've been watching since 1972. It's now 2005. That is a long period of my life where Star Trek has grown, evolved, and changed with the times. And for the most part, I always felt it was truthful. And now when Star Trek rolls along in 2009, what do? Rather than what they'd been doing, making new crews, new characters, they go back in time, which, by the way, they're still doing now. And Star Trek is only about itself. And it's changing and going over ground that I've been watching since I was a little kid and doing it badly. So the reason I'm toxic about Star Trek is the people that run Star Trek don't know Star Trek. They didn't grow up with it. It didn't change their lives the way it changed my life. They're tourists, and they don't give a fuck. And so I think all fans who have been fans for a long time have been growing up with this stuff, and as it's evolved, nobody would have thought in 1990 that there was going to be a big budget Iron Man movie that would eventually spawn a 23 movie series in the Infinity Saga, where we would see a great majority of Marvel's top tier players in $200, $300, $400 million movies that would eventually gross $3 billion. Nobody thought that would happen. And the problem is, once you're doing that, once you assume that responsibility, you better make it fucking good. And as I've said before on this show, it's not about racism or sexism or homophobia. It is about being betrayed by bad fucking storytelling. That's where the anger comes from. And then how culture has been weaponized against people because of social media since 2012, whatever. Jonathan Haidt. Again, read the books of Jonathan Haidt. Nobody will, but you should. Or just watch YouTube videos with him. He'll explain it all, but you should read his books too. You know, I mean, usually it's pretty telling to read books. If there's a public figure that's being reviled, pretty good bet they've probably written a book. And if they've written a book, go back and read it. And then you can read the people that hate that person will tell you why their book sucks too. I mean, this is why reading is so important. Anyway, let's see. Let's go on. And Alan Moore is coming. My 14-year-old grandson tells me the older Pokemon aficionados can display the same febrile disgruntlement. Is it a case of those unwilling to outgrow childhood enthusiasms, possibly because those anchor them to happier and less complex times, who now feel that they should be sole arbiters of their pursuit? See, everybody, this is what people keep saying. It's not that. There are, of course, entirely benign fandoms. Networks of cooperative individuals who like the same thing can chat with others sharing the same pastime and importantly provide support for one another in difficult times. These healthy subcultures, however, are less likely to impact on society in the same way that the most strident and presumptuous fandoms have managed. Unnervingly rapidly, our culture has become a fan-based landscape that the rest of us are merely living in. Our entertainments may be canceled prematurely through an adverse fan reaction, and we may endure a largely misogynistic crusade such as Gamergate or Comicsgate from those who think gate means conspiracy, and that Nixon's disgrace was predicated on a plot involving water. But this is hardly the full extent to which fan attitudes have toxified the world surrounding us, most obviously in our politics. I don't think fandom has necessarily... I think politicians have plenty of acrimony with each other. They're not necessarily fans. Elections that can decide the fate of millions are conducted in an atmosphere more suited to evictions on I'm a Celebrity, in which contestants who are insufficiently amusing are removed from office. Saleability, not substance, is the issue. Those who vote for Donald Trump or Boris Johnson seem less moved by policy or prior accomplishment than by how much they've enjoyed the performance on The Apprentice or Have I Got News for You. And throughout the UK, we're now familiar with what a Stephen Axley Lennon fan convention looks like. An enthusiasm that is fertile and productive can enrich life and society, just as displacing personal frustrations into venomous tirades about your boyhood hobby can devalue them. Quite liking something is okay. You don't need the machete or the megaphone. Candidly, for my part, readers would have always been more than sufficient. And look, for the most part, I agree with what he's saying here. Are we angry? Are people angry about these things? Yes. But you know what? I'm more angry about what's happened to Star Trek because I feel it's been dumbed down. It's easy to say. I feel it's been dumbed down, and it really doesn't have to say much beyond Star Trek itself. It's become about Star Trek. And there's a lot of people that identify with it, and that's fine because, let's face it, newer fans, and I don't want to criticize. If you're a fan of something, love it all you want. If you love something, please do. But you're also fans that are loving things, and you're not reading fucking books. So your perspective on something is only coming to you from the thing that you're a fan of. You're not opening your mind enough. You're not getting... I mean, to me, the things that I was a fan of as a kid and the people I knew were fans of as a kid augmented and opened up the rest of their lives to the great possibilities of existence. Being a fan of Star Trek made you want to boldly go out into the real world and experience what was out there. Go have your own adventures. Go where you've never gone before. That's what I saw from my friends who were fans. We were doers. We would go out and do things. We would seek things out. You had to work for it, man. And what that did was it made you a better person. It expanded those horizons. And when you're expanding your horizons, it's a self-feeding. It's like you are V'ger. You're learning all that is learnable. You're going out into the world because you can't get enough. You can't get enough. That's what reading does for you. But you have to put out, you have to put out the effort. Nowadays, social media has made it so you can just sit here and get anything you want. And I do it. I love it. I do. But I also like to put something down and go out into the world. Go out and see what's out there. There's a local restaurant here sometimes as I have been editing True Noir. I usually have one meal a day, and I'll go down and I'll go around 3 or 4 o'clock, which is like happy hour, and with the World Series on and stuff, it's always like you sit around the bar and there's a bunch of people, and I get to talk to people I don't know, see what's going on, where are they coming from, what's happening in their lives. And even though I might be there for an hour or two, it's still interesting. I have a craving to go out and experience the world because I read books, because of all the experiences I had, because I was a fan. Loving science fiction, fantasy, and horror, loving genre work led me to all the other genres, which, again, lead you out into the world. And that's why this stuff is important. And the reason that fans, I think the thing that is the rest of the world doesn't take, they would much rather point to fandom and say, oh, those people, they're turning the world toxic. When really, fans are just responding to the toxicity of the world itself. They're tired of being gaslit. They're tired of being misconstrued. And it's problematic. Just kind of like my stream strength is problematic for whatever reason. And I would say that, look, the one thing that fans have going for them is that they passionately love something that other people have created. Now, hopefully it's led a lot of people like myself. I mean, I didn't go online. I was already on shows. I didn't go online because I was angry. I'm online because I'm on YouTube because I like to share what I love. And there's a lot to share. And yes, I've been overly critical of Star Trek because that's the one thing that I've been a fan of the longest. For decades longer than the people that are creating Star Trek now. And I can't help but feel those people are tourists. Not because I want to work on Star Trek. I've never worked on TV. I don't know if I could. That's why I'm making my own things. I'm making my own audio drama, which I think will show that I'm a fan of great acting and great storytelling. And I'm trying to take one man's story and bring it to life in a way that no one ever has. And I'm trying to do something unique that I'm in charge of. And that's what I hope to bring you with True Noir. If I didn't think, I could not talk mad shit on the internet if I wasn't doing my own work. And I've never been, I've always done work that I've made happen, but it's never been something from the top down that I've really instigated or created. I've always inherited something or been hired to fix something or do this or that, except for, free enterprise. But even then I was working with partners and all that. And it was great. It was a great experience. And True Noir, I'm working with partners too, but the methodology and the way it's going has been something I've designed, and that's what keeps me going. Where did that come from? Being a fucking fan. Being a fan of all kinds of genres, loving film noir, loving great literature, loving great storytelling, and knowing when you have a man like Max Allan Collins who's written a great script, you go with it. I don't want to rewrite his work. You'll hear it. You heard it in the clip I played at the beginning of the show. That's some great writing. And it allows actors to give us some great acting. Anyway, I've been rambling on, and I haven't done this in a while, but let's see what people have to say. Wow, there's a lot of people here. RRTNZ says Alan Moore is a genius who's writing elevated comic books as a genre. However, his opinions are a bit wacky. Chuck Norris was in Watchmen. He played the overwhelming sense of existential dread. Freddie Lane became a subscriber. Thanks, Freddie. Our own philosopher, Darth Plato, says activism is not a substitution for a real education, as evidenced lately, especially not on college campuses today. You're absolutely right about that. A super chat came in from L. Says, on the topic of Alan Moore, why do these people always blame the fans, but never the people who disrespect the fans to begin with? Or the people that come in and don't do the work and add to the work that fans have already loved. And when they see subpar work, they're like, what is this all about? I mean, it's not that people, I don't think that fandom is inherently, look, there is always toxicity in the world. But I think really what fans are putting up with, I know this because of Star Trek. Some people might say that it's ridiculous to say, oh, you just don't want to see a black woman as a lead. No one cares. Nobody cares. That ship has sailed. Who cares? Nobody cares what color somebody is if the story's good. I mean, when I was a kid, I fucking loved Shaft. I didn't know anybody like Richard Roundtree in my life. You think I wasn't going to watch it? Shaft kicked ass. Isaac Hayes sang a great theme song. Shut your mouth. I mean, come on. We all want great stories. Nobody cares if there's a female protagonist, a male protagonist. They're not going to not watch it because, oh, it's a girl. If it's a good story and it's well told, it's great. The problem is over the last 15 years with all the ways that storytelling has been polluted in its myriad ways, that's what people are angry about. A lot of what's passing today is gaslighting people that expect a good story. And we're just expected to take what they give us. It's ridiculous. It's really weird. RJ McReady says, reading Justice League International Volume 1. starting to think that the James Gunn Superman and the new DC universe are going forward, might use that comic book run as a foundation for the DCU initially for the start of Gods and Monsters. Look, I don't know if he's going to go that far into the humor, but I think that the fantasy elements of that, why not? I loved that comic when it came out, and it came out right in the era when comics were going grim dark and really, Dark Knight. The Dark Knight Returns existed in the same world with Justice League International, or it was just Justice League when it came out. Everyone loved that comic. It was so great. But I think you're right. That's why I'm excited for James Gunn's Superman. We're going to see a Superman and a universe that we've never seen before. I really believe that. I think it's going to be quite interesting. Jesse Bellamy became a subscriber. Major Chai Chai, who actually I had lunch with last week, or earlier this past week. So glad Robservations is back, she says. My brain has missed this type of discussion. She also says, happy birthday, Rob. Well, it's good to be back. I'm sorry for the last 2 weeks. I haven't done one of these in 2 weeks. I'm like, I forgot even how to do them. Thomas Logan says, New Trek and Disney Wars are examples of studios betraying the IP's creators. Folle et Deux is a case of fandom entitlement hijacking the auteur's vision. Oh, I totally agree with that. Pardon me. I've just read two different things. First of all, let me go back to Signal Strength 5. Do you think Star Trek can be turned around? With the exception of Picard Season 3, not a fan of anything since Enterprise. If yes, how? I'm with you. I'm not a fan of anything. I mean, I get people like Star Trek Lower Decks, but to me, that's just a Star Trek fan. Star Trek Lower Decks is about people that like Star Trek. There is in fan circles, there's a certain element of that knowing humor, that sort of inside baseball humor that all fans love to be a part of. To me, it was always annoying because it wasn't. It's like we all know. We all get the references. Ha ha ha. It's all really funny. Now, there's been some good storytelling on Star Trek Lower Decks, I will grant you. But it's still, I can't get past the fourth wall breaking references. It's like, I already know them. I'm as smart as you, Mike McMahon. I've seen all these episodes too. And like I've said, you're outside. I'd rather see you concentrate. I think Mike Mann might be interesting. It'd be interesting to see him try and make a non-comedic Star Trek show that never referenced. As soon as you reference... We saw this with Alien Romulus. As soon as you reference a past show, you kind of, in a way, and I have to say, Next Generation, yeah, you brought in Admiral McCoy, so you could be like, see, yeah, and of course, Naked Now referred to the Naked Time, and they pushed that away, and they basically went through the first 2 seasons, and the first 2 seasons and a half, you don't meet Sarek until season 3, and it was played by Mark Leonard. Now that was cool. Because it was actually Mark Leonard playing Sarek again. But nowadays, it's, you watch Alien Romulus and somebody has to say, get away from her, you bitch. I'm like, you were doing good. And then you had to fuck it up. And then why do you have to name check actual language from a previous movie? It's so bizarre that stories feel the need to do this. But yeah, do I think Star Trek can be turned around? Well, I don't think I don't think Section 31 is going to do it, and I certainly don't think Starfleet Academy is going to do it. Because what they're doing is, now, Star Trek was an anthology show that delved into different kinds of genres. But now it's like, okay, let's do our teen angst show. Look, as I've said before, everybody wants to do their Joss Whedon show. Everybody wants to do Buffy or Angel. And they figure, okay, we'll do Buffy or Angel in a school, which is now Starfleet Academy, even though Buffy and Angel it was in school. It was in a school itself. It was in high school, Now it's like we're going to college, and it's just the same thing again. Great. So we're going to watch a Star Trek show about people that aren't getting to the stars until later. Are we going to follow a cadet class, go through their entire training? It worked for All Mankind. Maybe it'll work for Star Trek, Starfleet Academy. I doubt it, because those people don't want to watch, or they don't want to write Star Trek. They want to write everything but Star Trek, which is a bummer. But what are you going to do? Thomas Logan says, New Trek and Disney Wars are examples of studios betraying the IP's creators. Well, again, the problem now with it, the shows are not created by creators. The shows are now owned by a corporation. And the corporation uses corporate thinking to hire people to have them make more of this product. It's the actual exact reverse. The IPs, the way they're controlled now, and the way they move forward, is the exact opposite of how they should work. It should be passionate creators who get a chance to create the stories they want to tell, not a corporation deciding who they should hire to make stories. Corporations don't know anything about stories. They don't know. And yet they're now in a position where they look at it, they pick people, they use the same criteria they'd pick a new CEO to pick somebody that should direct the next Star Wars movie. They look, it's either now DEI initiatives or they're looking at a spreadsheet of what somebody else has done, or a combination of both. Not that they're passionate creators that they think could do the best thing with this IP. They don't know that because they don't know how, which is a bummer. B Thing says, I've loved Star Wars and Star Trek basically my whole life. I'm tired of being bored and then having corporations of all things tell me I'm evil. I'm with you too. But they're frustrated. Remember, corporations don't understand. We spent $250 million on this. Why don't you like it? I don't understand how interesting, thoughtful people can look at the book of Boba Fett. And if you know anything about the history of Boba Fett, all the way back to, yes, the holiday special, and you think about what Boba Fett could have been. You know, I said something today on George the Giant Slayer stream. I said that people love the Penguin, and I'm like, the Penguin is what the Boba Fett show should have been. The death of Jabba the Hutt left a power vacuum. You know, whether it's Mos Espa, Mos Eisley, whatever, the Hutts have left, the death of Jabba has left a power vacuum. Boba Fett sees a way of coming in and consolidating. He thought he'd be a gun for hire, but now he wants something more. And it could have been the Penguin in the Star Wars universe. And if you say that, people are like, oh yeah, that would have been great. But no, we get a show that was made by people who seemingly never watched a crime thriller. Never watched, even modern crime thrillers. Whether it was Scarface, whether it's King of New York, whether it's Undercover, take your pick. Whether it's Goodfellas, whether it's Casino, there's so many. Boardwalk Empire. It should have been an amalgam of those things in space. It's a no-brainer. Shit, man. If you made another Boba Fett series, hire Max Allan Collins to write it. He'll give you a great show. Fuck Griffith says, school nearly put me off reading forever. I got myself into reading. The way they teach Edgar Allan Poe destroyed its mood and made it boring. It's true. Part of it is you gotta blame teaching, 100%. The Star Trek Starfleet Academy writers likely don't understand the challenges of teaching leadership, let alone leadership at all. I totally agree with you, Major Chai Chai. Whereas people like Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, served in the military during World War II, which made it something definitely worthwhile. And you know what else? There are shows, like if somebody said to me, like one of my favorite shows about, I would have made a Starfleet Academy show like The Paper Chase and Friday Night Lights and maybe a little bit of Fame, the TV series version. An amalgamation of all those things. I would not have looked at Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The Paper Chase would have been a much better, and you'd have to hire the John, maybe Paul Giamatti could have been the John Houseman character, could have been Professor Kingsfield. I don't know. Maybe. But that's what I would have done. That's what I would have looked to. Of course, everybody would have been like, what's the Paper Chase? I don't even know what that is. Yeah, and the way things are taught, like, that's a really good point that Fuck Griffith was making. Because you're right, the way things are taught is really important. It's up to teachers to get people interesting or interested. Brian Erdy says, visited Lake Washington last year when my girlfriend had a conference. Beautiful. Best part of the visit, doing the Twin Peaks tour and having coffee and cherry pie at the Tweeds Cafe. Snoqualmie Falls, too. Amazing. I love Snoqualmie Falls Lodge. It is fantastic. So yes, I totally agree with you. I'm glad you got to go up there, Brian Erdy. That's my home stomping grounds. So yeah. Well, anyway, I just want to go on. I want to do a Robservations. I hadn't done one in a while. I wanted to talk about these two articles. I think that look, ultimately, has the world gotten more toxic? Yes, but not because of fans. The world has gotten more toxic overall because people are now what do I say at the end of every show? Every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. People don't want to do that anymore. They've been radicalized by their social media. They have not taken the time to learn about other people or the value. I mean, listen, if you read books, the one thing that you value is characters. Whenever you read books, there's more and more characters to discover. And I've always thought of people I meet in my life, you meet new people, you're meeting new characters. You want to see where they take you. You don't want to hate people. Why hate somebody? You know, don't be judgmental, as Ted Lasso says. Be curious. If you've seen that clip that's always on, it always comes up in my feed of him throwing the darts with who? The guy from Buffy. You know, was it Giles? It's a great clip. But on that note, True Noir is coming. I hope you guys will support it. It's very odd watching my channel used to. Is it because I haven't done one of these in 2 weeks? So YouTube is like, why are you bogarting our bandwidth, Bob? Anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson and anyone else who might be here. Thank you so much. Signal Strength 5 says the Cure album listen stream on the 1st. Ooh, that's not a bad idea. Is that when it drops? B Thing says the Book of Boba Fett was somehow the Godfather in reverse. Become a mob boss and turn into a good, noble person. You're not wrong there. That's very interesting. I like the idea of doing a Cure listening stream, but we can't broadcast it, I don't think. I don't know how to do that. I don't know what we would do. But it's not a bad idea, Signal Strength 5. Not a bad idea at all. Although I have to say this. When I get albums that I'm really looking forward to, I like to kind of listen to them by myself. Maybe we can listen to it after I've heard it a couple times. Because I need to digest. Man, because when I got Disintegration, woo, that was amazing. Getting Disintegration, Fascination Street, hearing that, it was incredible. Incredible. But yeah, I do like that idea though. Doing some kind of a listening, that might not be such a bad thing to do. That could be kind of fun. But anyway, everybody, live long and prosper and all of those things. I can't wait for you guys to hear True Noir. We're going to release it on consecutive Fridays. And if we really do drop it on November 8th, which I'm hoping to do, although that's only, 10 days away or something. Well, it would be a week from Friday. We'll be ready to go, but it's the episodes after that. We'll always be fighting it, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Well, anyway, everybody, I want to thank you for being here for another episode of Robservations. I'll be doing more of these. And remember, my 1,000th episode, this was 993, so there's, 7 more to go. If you want to be on it's the 1,000th episode. It's going to be all about you imagination connoisseurs. Send me an email. Put Robservations 1000 in the heading, and then tell me what you want to talk about, because I'm going to schedule people. And it's going to be a 1,000-minute show, so a 16-hour show broken up by some interviews and things that I've already done. And tell me what you want to talk about. And you can find me at RM Burnett, RMBURNETT 1701, if you know, you know, at gmail.com. Claudius says, interesting show, Rob. This subject requires a panel. The tribal divide is not one-sided. Oh, I agree. I do. But I just wanted, this is actually two topics I've combined into one just because I wanted to. Hey, Claudius, what's going on with disclosure, man? 2027, is that it? Is it going to happen? I really hope it does, to be honest. Enough of all this stuff. I mean, apparently if you listen to people down in Baja, there's an alien base where people are coming and going, and the Nimitz is out there monitoring the aliens coming and going, which is probably par for the course, because of course the Nimitz is the one American aircraft carrier that's traveled through time. Splash the zeros. Am I right? Anyway, everybody, that's a final countdown joke for you, but that joke That's 47 years ago or whatever it was. No, that was 1980, right? Final Countdown was 80. So, you're looking at 44 years ago. Yeah, 44 years ago. By the way, if you guys haven't seen The Final Countdown, it's not a perfect movie, but it's pretty great. And Blue Underground put it out in 4K. And you know what? If you thought that, before Top Gun, pre-Top Gun, The Final Countdown showed the love for the F-14. The Tomcats in The Final Countdown are the best. When they go up against Japanese Zeros, it's even better. Talk about wish fulfillment. My mom took me to see that movie. I think I liked it way more than she did. Anyway, and John Scott, great score. Dun 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 dun. That's great. Anyway, I'm losing it now. So you guys, I'm gonna go back to editing True Noir, episode 4, with Anthony LaPaglia as Al Capone. Wait do you hear more of Katie Sackhoff and Michael Rosenbaum. It's heartbreaking. And since I already said, and remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. I don't have to say it again. All you have to do is listen. Good night, everybody. Oh, Claudia's fired another question in there. Are you not convinced of non-human intelligence? Maybe other human, maybe other terrestrial? Well, yeah. Sure. Of course. Why not? There's all these megaliths we can't understand. Why not? How are the pyramids so accurate? Why do they chart the stars? I'm convinced of non-human intelligence. Sure. There is non-human intelligence on this planet. I see it every day. And watching all the videos of like sea creatures coming to help, please, getting boats to turn around and follow them so they can free their comrades, or somebody, some baby deer gets somebody to free their mom, and the baby deer comes back en masse with the rest of his friends to somebody's house. There's all kinds of this intelligence that we want to deny on this planet, but I want to see aliens, man. Where are they? I want to see, I want to see it happen. And you know what? Why not? It wouldn't surprise me if we're just one great big zoo or an amusement park that we're a destination spot for bigger intelligences that just come and watch. What would be more entertaining than to be on Earth right now? All the different things you can go see. You can go see the humanitarian disaster in the Sudan. You could go to see the war in Gaza. You could go see the war in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, and all the other things going on all over the planet. And speaking of that, I think if they were smart, Putin should have had a reality show about what do you do when you put troops from North Korea that are untried in battle, untested, up against the Ukrainians who have developed their guerrillas fighting skills over the last 2.5 years. What happens to those poor North Koreans when they step into that theater? Nothing good. And on that note, everybody, I will bid you a fine and fond good night. Live long and prosper. And remember, vote. Get out and vote. Vote your conscience, vote your heart, but remember, vote locally, state, and federally. Don't just vote for the president. There's a lot of ballot measures that you should take into consideration.